Hey, this is DM Rob G during editing. I just wanted to mention that I'm sorry for the audio issues I'm having. I didn't realize the microphone would be that bad. I can't turn this up. I probably need to get one that I can. So I had to mess with the audio in post. So please enjoy what you can. Hello and welcome to the reformatted review channel of DM Rob G. I know it's been almost a year at this point, but this particular review needed a fair bit of research on my behalf, and for me to come to terms with some real life happenings, which is available in my new review channel, DM Rob G Gaming. But for this review, I'm going to put some of my education in Black history to good use. That is, some of my education. I don't have a whole lot of formal education here, but I do have a lot of reading I have done, and a lot of experience I've had, and so on and so forth. But considering that the political environment seems to be getting worse, I can't just sit back and take another 4 years of schooling just to have a basic degree. Now I'm going to help cover a topic that has been bugging me this time, and has actually been heavily and emotionally discussed among me and members of my Discord. Or rather, me and members of the various Discords I am. The issue is the portrayal of racism in movies and TV, and of course other forms of media. Now, this idea occurred to me when I was watching a show called The Archie Bunker Show. Now, The Archie Bunker Show is a spin-off from All in the Family. Both these shows feature a character called Archie Bunker. He is known as the world's most lovable racist. That is literally what I believe TV Guide said at the time. That is not me. That is TV Guide and a lot of the advertisements. But this show itself, the Archie Bunker Show and All in the Family is notable for having an openly racist protagonist who would openly insult anyone who isn't a white cisgendered male. Now, this is a stark contrast to today's standard motive of racism, which is more of the clean-cut, hypermasculine male found in American History X. So this is more of a video essay comparing and contrasting, and I'm sure the comments are going to be fun. I hope they're not turned off at some point. For the majority of this review, I will take The Archie Bunker Show Season 3, Episodes 23 and 24. Now, there is a lot more to The Archie Bunker Show and Archie Bunker as a character, as well as All in the Family, and I will draw some points to them, but the majority of this particular video essay will concentrate on these two episodes. I mean, this is just merely a method to keep the video short, and I need to limit it somewhere anyway. So this is pretty much where I drop. The basic premise of this 2-episode arc is an old flame named Catherine comes to meet Archie at his bar, taking him out, and his life from that point improves. We can see that as Archie is invited inside of Catherine's apartment, he is a perfect gentleman. He puts his hat on the hat rack. He hangs up his coat, and he really doesn't say anything that upsetting. Next morning, Archie is in a really good mood for obvious 1970s censored reasons, and it's actually to the point where both his live-in daughters are actually quite shocked by the way he is actually acting. However, there is a bit of a downturn when Archie is soon teased by his friends, where he starts to realize just how serious his relationship with Catherine could become. It is his first big relationship since Edith, his wife from All in the Family, died in, I believe, Season 1 of The Archie Bunker Show. At this point, he becomes self-conscious, and when Catherine visits him to give him a gift, he immediately becomes basically controlling, setting rather unfair demands. Catherine basically finds these demands rather disgusting. She says, well, if we're not going to be in a relationship, why should I follow your rules if you're not going to follow them for my behalf? Which I will admit is a really fair point. Catherine also mentioned that she was going to invite him to dinner at a restaurant, but because of Archie's behavior, she pulls this invitation. He's clearly hurt because he's basically lost the one person that he's actually legitimately cared for, and legitimately cared for him, and he visits Catherine at her house to apologize. Even though Catherine is about to kick him out, she accepts his apology. She accepts his apology. Now, there are several things to note in this screen. One, when Archie is on the defensive, he completely forgets to be sweet. He doesn't hang his hat up. He doesn't hang his coat up. For somebody from the 1950s and 60s, this is kind of a big deal. He basically dropped all his He basically dropped all his manners and his consideration of others. He's defensive. He's lashing out, and he's reading into way too much of what Catherine is trying to say. But on top of all that, he's no longer courteous. He forgets his basic manners, like hanging his hat and his coat up like he did earlier in the episode. It's very clear all his behavior relates to how insecure he actually is. God damn it. Well, we haven't seen much of his racism yet. Catherine has ignored several other comments relating to it. For the next episode, Archie is invited out to meet Catherine's brother, and this is where the audience sees Archie's racism on full display. The episode starts with him making comment about how Hispanics aren't wanted in his bar, at least the ones who aren't working in the back. Now, one of his employees reaches out to him and says, "Hey, Catherine's brother is here." Archie turns around and meets the wrong guy. At this point, Archie notices another Hispanic male sitting in his bar. He begins to openly berate his two Hispanic workers. "You weren't supposed to have any of your friends here." However, a timely entrance from Catherine herself reveals that this new Hispanic guy is her brother. And he was supposed to be the very guy Archie was supposed to meet. Now, as a natural result of going through such an assault on the racial identity of an individual, John ends up just straight out leaving the bar. Now, there is something I want you to pay attention to. See how even though John clearly leaves because of the harassment, but he's still trying to be a better person, Archie has no clue, like none whatsoever, that he has done anything wrong. His racism is so central to his character that not being racist, that it never occurred to him what he would seem like to other people. Now, I want you to pay attention to that because it's going to come up later. Now, the things he said were so natural to him that he can't draw a connection between the things he said and John's rage. Because for him, it is so natural. I mean, why wouldn't anyone say these things about people like John? Now, pay attention because that's going to come up later. Such as when he meets Catherine's family. When he begins to talk down to them. He can't help but talk down to Catherine's family.
Oh, public relations. That is a very good thing for a Puerto Rican guy to begin with.
Despite how much he supposedly cares for her. Because for him, the things he says are so natural. At the end, Catherine's family hates him, and Catherine asks him to leave. At the very end of the episode, Archie still has no idea what he said was wrong, and why they hated him so much. It takes Catherine's ultimatum of, "If you don't change, I will leave you," that he actually even thinks about changing. And of course, this being a sitcom, it's kind of played up for a joke. Which, I mean, I'm not a fan of, but this being the 1970s, and racism isn't as nearly as talked about as it was today, I get them having to make a joke about it for the TV execs. Now, since talking about a single person isn't going to do much, I'm going to contrast this with the portrayal of racism in American History X. Now, American History X is told from the viewpoint of Derek, a white supremacist who's sent to jail for manslaughter. This entire movie itself, I mean, Derek is rehabilitated in prison, and now he actively helps his younger brother Danny move away from the racism that once took him in, and made it give the illusion of family. Now, the movie itself is told in a very non-linear fashion. We find out more about why Derek is in prison halfway through the movie. And so I can't really break down the movie as it is as shown like I could with the Archie Bunker show. So I'm going to have to tell it in a far more linear fashion. And honestly, it's a really great movie. You should see it. But the story starts out with Danny trying to write a civil rights essay on Mein Kampf for a Jewish history class. As a result, Danny is forced to study directly under a outreach worker or be expelled. This course is called American History X. Danny's first assignment is to write a report on his older brother, Derek. See, years ago, Danny and Derek's father was killed while fighting a fire at the home of a black narcotics dealer. After this, Derek gives a racially motivated tirade on national TV and enters a mentorship by a high-profile neo-Nazi named Cameron Alexander, and they form the white supremacist gang Disciples of Christ. Derek soon beat several Crip members out of a basketball game, thus successfully winning the courts for Team White Folk. After that, he organizes an attack on an Asian-owned supermarket, employing several black people and several immigrant workers, which quite frankly is one of the most terrifying attacks I have ever seen put to film. Really, go, if you see nothing else, go watch it and you can see why people are so scared right now. And then after all that, go read a book called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, or Deacons of Defense, or Negroes with Guns, and at that point realize just how common those assaults were back in the 1960s and before that. Anyway, Derek is invited to his mother's house, where her new boyfriend Murray is at dinner, and they get into an argument about the 1992 LA riots. This enrages Danny to the point where he assaults his sister, openly berates Murray. Later that night, the same Crips members that Derek beat in a basketball game try to steal Derek's truck. Derek shoots two men, killing one and wounding the other, before literally curb stomping the wounded gang member, and I literally cannot show you that scene. I can show you a still screen of it, but for me to show you would break YouTube guidelines. Danny is arrested and sentenced to 3 years prison for voluntary manslaughter. In prison, Derek joins the Aryan Brotherhood and befriends and is forced to work with a black inmate named Lamont. However, Derek becomes disillusioned with prison gang politics, namely with how this prison gang he's in deals with non-white inmates and is involved in narcotics. However, there's also the fact that no member of the Disciples of Christ have ever visited him, no matter how close they actually were. He abandons the Aryan Brotherhood, who insult and beat him in retaliation, and again, I cannot show you this. Which, quite frankly, all this shows just how vicious these gangs actually can be. Now, once Derek leaves the Aryan Brotherhood, he is forced to watch over his shoulder for retaliation from any African American groups, because he has no protection anymore. Now, remember how I said he was forced to work with a prisoner named Lamont? This would actually help propel him to leave the Aryan Brotherhood. Upon returning home, he finds Danny sporting a Disciples of Christ tattoo, and his friend Seth disrespects Derek's mother while grooming Danny for the group. Since Seth and Danny are controlled by Derek's old mentor Cameron, Derek goes to confront Cameron, basically calling him out. This confrontation is basically Derek calling out Cameron for abandoning him, for using him, for basically being a coward, hiding behind his group and acting tough, while at the same time declaring his departure from the group, and ordering that they stay away from Danny. However, Cameron becomes verbally abusive, and Derek absolutely beats Cameron's worthless ass. I can't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude at that. All the members of the Disciples of Christ turn against Derek, even to the point where Seth holds Derek at gunpoint. However, Derek manages to disarm Seth and holds the entire group at gunpoint and leaves with Danny. On the way back home, Derek explains everything about his prison term and how the pair about his prison term and the pair remove white supremacist posters from his wall. The next day, Derek is off aiding an investigation as both Seth and Cameron are in the ICU. Frankly, after the beating he gave them. However, Danny is killed by a black student from a confrontation from the day before. Now that we got that out of the way, it's time for some compare and contrast. To start off, I'm going to mention that about the various friend groups. American History X shows us what a group of neo-Nazis looks like. Now, for this part, I'm going to break the group down a bit, kind of artificially, to what's shown in the movie, because there are several archetypes at play that I see and have seen. It is a small group who are there for various reasons. There's no single reason any single person is there at a single point. But American History X does a good job at kind of taking the limited screen time and rounding them out a bit. For example, Cameron the leader is there because the group gives him power. That would be the first type. The second type would be the people who are there to hang out that would be what Danny would be trying to do. He's doing it to hang out because he's in an in-group now. Seth and Derek's girlfriend will probably be in this group because the minute he goes back, they're like, "Hey, let's all hang out," which Derek can see right through the bullshit. And the third would be people who are involved for protection, who are invited in for protection, who are scared, who have no other place to turn. This, for example, would be basically why Danny joined up with the Aryan Brotherhood in prison. He was there for protection against he saw what would be scary African Americans. That would be why the group commits atrocities. They see it as protection, despite the fact that these are clearly acts of terrorism. And they're doing it over slights and threats that don't really exist. However, I should note that this principle is seen more in street gangs. It's probably more obvious in street gangs than it is in a lot of other groups. There are groups that would actually go out and strike at people, but from what I've seen on the news, I see more street gang violence than I do like American History X violence. Now, comparing this principle to Archie, we find much of the same archetypes exist, but in a very muted form. I think as a result of the Archie Bunker show's serial format, we can tune in for multiple episodes on character building, so it becomes a bit more obvious to what's going on. But after All in the Family ended, Archie Bunker opened up a bar called Archie Bunker's Place. It's where he controls who comes in and who comes out. In fact, we see him kicking out a Hispanic male because of who he is. And we see him hanging out with his friends. All of that fills out all three of those archetypes that I talked about earlier. They're not going out and, committing mass violence, but they are being a very insular paranoid group that is centered around, quite frankly, insecurities. Archie lives alone with his two daughters, and while it seems like he fits in the first group, he's actually, he has Hispanic workers, sure, but really the only protection he offers is, we'll be over here, you be over there, let's not mix. Basically what separate of equal would end up becoming. They perceive themselves as safe because they have segregated people who they wrongly believe would hurt them. I can go through this book and point out many, like the first African American mayors of various cities. But I can also point out a lot of racial violence. How do I want to say this? Like, I can go through here and point out a lot more organized violence than I can go through watching CNN. Basically, the racism that Archie Bunker shows and the way it is portrayed is far more common than far more common today than the hyper-violent organized group of what American History X would show. And now we move on to the physical and emotional states. With Derek, he was portrayed as a hyper-aggressive, cold, calculating skinhead. There are several times in the movie where his body strength is central to the scene. He beats up Cameron. After finding himself at gunpoint, he studies the situation and manages to disarm his former friend. That takes intelligence. It takes cunning and physical strength to pull that off. Not only that, but all of that helps fuel Cameron's arrogance. Like when his car is broken into. Derek takes a deep offense not only to who did it, but to the fact that it was his stuff in general. It's only when his arrogance is broken in prison that he actually sees the truth of who he actually is as a skinhead. And frankly, the truth of other skinheads around him. Which, and to bring him back to an earlier point, his friend Lamont also helped with that, because Lamont provided a African American point of view that wasn't gang related in any way. Now compare this to Archie Bunker, and we find that Archie Bunker is overweight, physically weak, and short-tempered. His racism shows, quite frankly, not in the same type of overly violent, overt acts that Derek would show, but more of the standard Republican, this is my bar, I earned it, and I don't want you here because I saw how you fit a stereotype. It is easy to see a large amount of ego in Archie. However, the biggest difference between Archie and Derek is just how absolutely insecure Archie is shown to actually be. Yes, Archie has ego, but you can see how he can't take a simple ribbing or a simple tease without going completely overboard to defend himself. For example, when he has a date with Catherine, he is talking to his bar friends. One of his bar friends says, "Hey, get married." He basically says, "Hey, get married soon." This comment makes him so scared that he immediately goes to Catherine and tries to set up some of the most sexist rules in the show. Who she can talk to. Clearly had an effect on him. But that was never an honest attempt to actually hurt him. Archie's emotional dependence on his friends causes him to question his entire relationship with Catherine, his masculinity, and that dependence causes him to think of a demand to show Catherine and others that he is still the alpha male. Not only in his life, but to others as well. Now, in fact, going back to All in the Family and the first season of Archie Bunker's Place, Archie was married. In All in the Family, he was a dock foreman. Now his wife is more of an equal, often seeking out her advice and support. Well, equal to what the 1950s would be. Now, his insecurities weren't as prevalent here as they would be in the Archie Bunker show. He would actually have a kind of backbone. He would actually be able to take a simple little insults like that and even throw shade back. He would basically be able to stand up for himself. Now, with the creation of the Archie Bunker show, Jean Stapleton felt that Edith, Archie's wife, had no longer had any kind of character arc, so Edith was killed off screen. By the way, on that note, Carol O'Connor, Archie Bunker's actor, did a really good job showing Archie's heartbreak as it ran into the series. If you look for it, it's actually really prevalent. Not only in that first episode where Edith dies, but in every episode beyond that. And this might seem like a tangent, but this episode takes place long after Edith's death. Her death clearly shook Archie, and that is why he can no longer really take an insult like that. For that close of a person, someone who's been married to almost all his life, he would need a far better, far more diverse friend group. He did not have that, so what we got is an incredibly far more racist Archie than All in the Family portrayed. And in fact, this episode shows really how depressed Archie actually is. You can look at All in the Family and find that Archie's a lot more lively. He's got a bit of a pep in his step. Now you can see his shoulders are almost always kind of slouched down. He kind of has low, slow speaking voice. Archie clearly got beat with an emotional stick. Oh, he also lashes out at people. He's snapping, he's growling. The minute he meets Catherine, when his daughters meet him the next morning, he's actually friendly and welcoming to the point where both his daughters are pleasantly surprised. It's such relief to see him in a good mood that they actually put at ease for once, instead of being constantly on the defensive at this, quite frankly, semi-abusive father figure that they had. His family actually likes being around Archie now, whereas compared to before, many of them would act with emotional distance all the time. But the emotions Archie had were completely normal, and quite frankly, the racism not so much. The racism, okay, for the 1970s, for a white male, sure, you could argue that was absolutely normal. But the fact that the way his emotions played on his treatment of Catherine, treatment of the Hispanics at his bar, treatment of his daughters, and it's only when Catherine threatens to leave him, and he starts to realize how miserable he was and how miserable he's going to be, that he haggles a bit. Brings it down to I can look at a single person every day and consider how they are equal to me, but I get to hate everybody else. But it's only this quite traumatic idea of being alone again and going through emotional turmoil again is what causes him to change. Compare this to Derek, and we find something similar but utterly different. He gets sent to prison for manslaughter because people robbing his car weren't people, they were just black. To top it all off, he viewed himself and his whiteness as the arbiter of retribution. He maintains the viewpoint until he realizes that his friends have abandoned him, never visiting, and on top of every other white supremacist dealing drugs and showing him that they are the same type of low-life, drug-dealing people that he viewed other races to be. Even when he turns his back on people he calls friends and family, they assault him, then leave him alone and very traumatized. He only self-reflects on his behavior at the treatment of others when he is forced to spend his time alone for the same type of retribution he once gave others. It is now at his most vulnerable, with no support of his former friends, that he is forced to reflect on what he believed. And quite frankly, I am also inclined to believe that his friend Lamont helped with that, albeit off screen. Both these characters have dealt with trauma, but each actor had different philosophies. Carol O'Connor told the New York Times, Archie's dilemma is coping with the world that is changing in front of him. He doesn't know what to do except to lose his temper, mouth his poisons, look elsewhere to fix his blame for his own discomfort. He isn't totally an evil man, he's shrewd, but he won't get to the root of his problems because the root of his problem is himself and he doesn't know it. That is the dilemma of Archie Bunker. I couldn't find a specific quote I liked, but Edward Norton spoke of how he wanted about the way he edited the film and he portrayed in his portrayal of Derek Vinyard was to emphasize Derek's anger and prejudice solve nothing. However, we see another major difference between these two, where Derek took his insecurities and proved to himself to combat the world around him, becoming what he believed to be a symbol of masculinity, shaved head, working out, eager to fight. Now, this by itself, from what I could tell, explains a lot of the racists I know. A lot of the racists I can look at on, say, Fox News, on YouTube, where all these masculinity types are, a lot of the problem is themselves, they just don't want to admit it, so they lash out at others. And Archie just doesn't want to improve. He is the way he's always has been. When his neighborhood changed, after All in the Family ended, he just moved out. He got his own bar. So he filled it full of racist friends so they could all hang out and never think about changing. They wanted to preserve what they believed to be a superior form of life, but on the other hand, looking at Derek and his friends, their method of protection is ultra-violence. So where Archie is old and overweight, Derek and his friends are young, lift weights, and attack people. Really, that is the most defining character difference between Derek and Archie. Archie and his friends would just kick you out of the bar, while Derek and his friends would compete for their territory. Where Archie is passive, Derek is aggressive. And honestly, when we come down to it, and I know I haven't said much, but this is not my area of expertise. Kind of citing my sources is more my area of expertise. But when it comes down to it, with these two differences, I think we need more Archie Bunkers. I mean, for the simple point that while both are destructive, there are a lot more Archie Bunkers on Fox News spewing poison than there are Derek's committing like ultra-violent hate crime. Well, for example, we'll look at how Archie mentioned several times how one of Reagan's policies have a positive effect on America, despite those same policies having a negative effect on race relations and U.S. society as a whole. For example, don't tax the rich. Get rid of all the support for small business. Those are Reagan era policy. Those are hurting Archie Bunker, but he refuses to see it. But at the same time, the Archie Bunker show addressed how, and what really entertains me and really brings a smile to my face, is how Archie Bunker showed how isolating those beliefs actually are. He is alone in the series. In fact, the Archie Bunker show ends with him dreaming about himself as president while woken up by a flushing toilet. That's, quite frankly, so utterly pitiful, it makes me laugh. I get a sick sense of Schadenfreude from that, because Archie is such an unapologetic racist. I'm not sure if it's me, but the show itself seems to be hinting that his business is either failing or could just be doing a lot better. I mean, look, every scene I see of Archie, there's always the same 5 or 6 people inside, and it's never crowded. Anytime it does such to be, Archie finds a reason to kick out some Hispanic, and a bunch of people leave. And they leave, and it's the same 5 or 6 people who are in there. And this is all while Archie remains oblivious, simply talking to the same 3 or 4 close friends over and over again that happen to populate his bar. His own daughters have honestly started to dislike him, and clearly want nothing to do with him, and they're gone when they get out of college. Looking at the subtle signs, they're always on the defensive when he's talking. They're never really around him like his family was in All in the Family, where his family would constantly be around him for the entire scene. His daughters are just in the scene, they say what they have to do, and they're gone, and it's just Archie. While we only have 2 hours to spend with Derek, it's actually much easier to see how isolated he actually is, especially when the abandonment is a plot point at several key points in the movie. What American History X doesn't show is any sort of interplay within the group itself. That is actually where the Archie Bunker show in all of its offensive nature actually shines. Even in just this pair of episodes, we can see how his friend group actually protects and even encourages his racist. Archie and Derek both join their groups because life is full of uncertainty and there's a constant risk of being hurt in some way. While many people have decided to accept this risk that is inherent in life, others have relied on a method of control and intimidation to protect themselves. And that is protecting themselves in spite of any negative effects that it has to the people around them. In American History X, it will be when Derek establishes clear borders between the black players and the basketball court. In Archie Bunker's place, the aforementioned moment where he is setting up rules for Catherine's role in the relationship. Archie doesn't really seem to be able to sustain any sort of aggression, or even the mental state needed for aggression. Not to mention the complete lack of physical form in the same way Derek can. In fact, there's even an episode of All in the Family where Archie is considering protesting against the Ku Klux Klan. The basic storyline is KKK wants to demonstrate in his city. He doesn't like it because of how violent they are. Not only does he seem now with Archie Bunker. Now think about this way. Archie Bunker also backed off the minute Catherine pushed back. This wouldn't be something Derek would do. The minute Catherine pushes back, Archie loses all the wind out of his sails. He loses all his bravado. And I could swear the look Carol O'Connor gave was sort of, oh God, I fucked up. He is so used to his wife Edith never calling him out, he literally has no idea what to do when someone stands up to him. It is a weakness that in fact, I'm not sure it's obvious either one of them, because, think about this. Why would Derek end up making the DOC if he wasn't that insecure in the first place? Now, this is something completely off the wall, but relevant. The biggest difference between the All in the Family and American History X, so while both feature racists. Biggest difference is that Archie never changed. He isn't just as an unrepentant racist as the last episode as the Archie Bunker Show as he was in the first episode of All in the Family. But here's the important aspect. All in the Family centered around the conservative Archie and his left-wing son-in-law Michael Stivic, who was played by Rob Reiner. The show would cover topics such as abortion, homosexuality, sexual assault, religion, miscarriages, breast cancer, menopause, impotence, among all the other topics, while having a cast of side characters who reflected a changing neighborhood. Keep in mind, all this took place in 1971. Think about that. Dr. King was assassinated in I'm sorry, I should rephrase that. All in the Family started in 1971. All in the Family started in 1971. The Civil Rights Act just passed Congress in 1964. Not even 10 years before that. Dr. King was even assassinated on April 4th, 1968, roughly 3 years before All in the Family. What All in the Family and American History X both did was start conversations on what racism is, how it has changed, and how it affected people. Derek being the violent bigot people think of when they think of white supremacy, and Archie was the bigot who would hide until he felt safe, until he would be hiding until it was safe to be a bigot. That's why I don't really allow racist jokes and stuff. Archie's biggest positive point is that he was the person you might... Hey, this is DM Rob G here. I just wanted to clarify that I meant more of Archie's biggest point is that he is the racist that you don't know, and you don't see that a lot anymore. I just forgot to make that point during the actual video. A lot of movies now will always have the racist up front in the first scene they're in. Archie isn't like that necessarily, and you'll see why later. You might get to know for a long time and then suddenly spout something so racistly vitriolic you are completely dumbfounded. While there are cool and racist characters on TV, they are never unrepentant in the same way as Archie was. There's always going to be usually there's a storyline of repentance, like with American History X, or like with Hordak in Netflix's She-Ra reboot. Either that, or the villain is going to be so unrepentantly evil, it's almost comical, like Horde Prime in the aforementioned She-Ra series, the Borg in Star Trek, or Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, or the Fire Lord in Avatar: The Last Airbender. All have no emotions. They act more like robots than actual humans. And frankly, that's a lot like what Derek was portrayed as before facing his trauma and disillusionment. But the closest character to Derek would probably be Zuko, since Zuko's change required both deep regret and even great sacrifice in order to change. Granted, American History X drives its message of anger solves nothing by allowing Danny's death to occur at the hands of someone demanding vengeance, which quite frankly fits the movie's theme really well. While the Borg is the Borg, Horde Prime and the Fire Lord aren't really realistic people. They're basically the fantasy of what we think abusers actually are. There's no driving force other than I hate something, therefore it must die. Usually it's more complex than that. Like again with Archie Bunker, with Derek. All in the Family was basically divided the audience into two parts. The Archie Bunker part, which would be asking its audience if there was anything of value in the older generation. The other part is basically asking if there's any point to the complaints of the youth of today, or to the complaints of the far more liberal youth. Yet in the end of their respective media, Derek loses his brother to the same anger he once used respective media, and it was this show that they explored several topics that were revolutionary in the 1970s. That is to say, the aforementioned abortion, racism being the big one. His show covers the concept of white flight and how racism affected African Americans entering predominantly white neighborhoods. This was something that no one would ever get a viewpoint of, because unless you were an African American moving into a predominantly white neighborhood, you would never realize just how many Archie bunkers there were, or even what it was like dealing with an Archie bunker. And according to the show's official canon, Archie will end up dying alone, a relic who never adapted to changing time or politics. Now that I think about it in historical terms, Derek would be like the Confederates, and Archie would be like the Northern states. One is violent to the very idea that minorities exist, while the other knows minorities exist, but they're just inferior. Both are covering different aspects of an incredibly complex mix of sociology, psychology, political manipulation, abuse, as well as written and unwritten classism through centuries of, quite frankly, societal evolution. What makes us as viewers feel better is to see the hyper-aggressive, hyper-fit, intelligent racists like Derek defeated and turned good. What doesn't make us feel good is realizing that while people can turn into anti-racists, there are still people like Archie Bunker who will never change and simply, quite frankly, don't want to. There are also people that still want nothing more than violence upon someone for something as simple as skin color, and view what kind of life that they give other people. Sure, but I mean, like, we can go ahead and do like California did and outlaw certain symbology, but what Archie Bunker showed, and I'm going to emphasize this again, even though I did it a couple minutes ago, was what it would be like for an African American moving in to a predominantly white neighborhood where Archie Bunker lives. Those laws California made outlawing certain symbology that I can't say on YouTube, Archie Bunker's still going to be there. And unless we acknowledge that, not having not being able to have certain symbology is basically a feel-good law. Like, if you want it, like, it might have made it less obvious that racists live there, but they still live there. And there are going to be people who still want nothing more than violence upon someone else for something simple as their skin color. And there are going to be people who are going to be passive in their racism until it is safe to speak. And once that happens, they will make your life a living hell. Both are aspects we need to acknowledge. And quite frankly, this is why I'm doing this right now as unprepared I have. I'm literally behind 6 months because I never truly felt prepared. But the more I hear about like Project 25 or whatever, the more I hear about like Project 25, the worse it's going to get, and it's not going to be getting any better unless more people like me do something about it, do what we can, and at least try to do what we can. And even though it might not be the same as a PhD, and despite it being not the same level as someone who has like 5 PhDs in Black history or a PhD in psychology with a specialization in racism. Like, I know I'm going to make mistakes, but I can't sit idly by anymore. And I know this, and quite frankly, that's what makes both interpretations really important, because both are two sides of a very ugly coin. That, and it shows, and the Archie Bunker show ends with Archie Bunker being woken up by a toilet, living alone because his family and friends all either died or abandoned him. But everyone, please have fun and enjoy. I have 2 other channels I might want to check out. I have my gaming channel where I'll probably keep up on like news and stuff. And I have a witchcraft channel, both of which are probably up on my channel right now. And everyone, please have fun and enjoy.